I'll never forget that morning. The sun had barely climbed over the rooftops when a harsh metallic roar split the quiet. At first I thought it was some construction crew down the street, but the sound was coming from my backyard. I threw on my slippers, bolted outside, and there she was. Melanie Payne, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, standing smugly beside a buzzing chainsaw as two men hacked into my century-old oak. That oak wasn't just a tree. It was the heart of my yard, older than the neighborhood itself, with roots deeper than Melanie's entire reign of terror. I shouted, demanded she stop. But Melanie just smirked, lifted her clipboard, and declared, HOA bylaw 47.8 unsafe vegetation must be removed. Never mind the fact that no such bylaw even exists. That's when I realized this wasn't about safety. It was about power, and Melanie had just declared war on the wrong man. Before we dive into the full story, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments below. The oak wasn't something you just glanced at on your way to the trash bins. It was the kind of tree that slowed you down, made you look up and remember you're smaller than time. My grandfather planted it when this land was a mishmash of pastures and gravel lanes, long before the HOA arrived with its laminated rules and weaponized clipboards. As a kid, I measured summers in rings of shade under those branches. As a man, I grilled steaks beneath them, hung lanterns there for my wife's birthday, and hammered a swing for my niece. If a yard can have a pulse, the oak was mine. Melanie Payne did not see a living memory. She saw a blemish on a brochure. I stood between her and the trunk, while her two day labor hires hesitated, chainsaw idling with a mean mosquito snarl. "Kill the engine," I shouted. "Nobody cuts another inch." One of them, Cap, turned backward. Sweat already beading, looked relieved and reached for the choke. The other looked to Melanie, who stood as if auditioning for a corporate training video on how to be overconfident. She lifted her clipboard like a scepter. Bylaw 47.8, she repeated, enunciating each number as if it were scripture. Unsafe vegetation must be removed immediately. This is an emergency action authorized by the HOA presidency. I laughed. Couldn't help it. You can barely authorize a lemonade stand without board approval, I said. There is no bylaw 47 point anything. And even if there were, it wouldn't let you trespass on private property and butcher a healthy tree. Melanie's smile was the kind that never reaches the eyes. Mr. Boyd, the common welfare doesn't trump the law, I cut in. And certainly not my deed. One chainsaw coughed to silence. The other sputtered, indecisive, until its operator, sharing a quick look with me that said, "I don't get paid enough to be arrested today," eased it down too. For a breath, the morning exhaled. Birds, a pair of stubborn doves, returned to the gutter's edge and resumed their bickering as if even they had opinions about Melanie. "Fine," Melanie said, crisp as a paper cut. "If you wish to formalize this, we can formalize. You'll receive a notice of violation this afternoon." She tapped the trunk with her pen, an absurd little poke against a century of oak. Canker, rot, insect blight. See the bark fissures. Classic hazard indicators. "Classic, you misreading what you don't understand," I said. "The arborist's report is on my fridge. Healthy crown sound structure, seasonal shedding within normal limits. But tell you what, let's formalize. Right now." I pulled my phone and began recording. Her jaw twitched. "For documentation," I said, steadying the frame on her HOA badge, which she wore like a sheriff's star at a parade. "Please state your name, title, and the exact bylaw number authorizing the removal of my tree from my private property without my consent." Behind her, the workers found sudden interest in their shoelaces. Melanie tilted her head the way people do when they want to look taller than you. Melanie Payne, president of the Brookstone Meadows Homeowners Association. Under bylaw. She paused, searching in the purse of her memory for the next bluff card. 47.8, subsection B, addressing imminent safety hazards. "Great," I said, feigning gratitude. "And the text of that bylaw is..." "Where exactly?" "In the rules packet," she said, brittle. "Which you seem to chronically ignore." "Right. The same packet that lists maximum mailbox height and acceptable tones of beige. Let's do this the simple way." I opened my email app, hit record on a voice note too. "I'm contacting the board and the police. If you and your crew are still on my property when they arrive, you can explain your beige theology to them." She flared. Melanie did not like being contradicted, not publicly, not in front of people she imagined were her subordinates. She fired a quick look at the workers. "Pack up," she snapped. "We'll return with proper documentation." In HOA speak, proper documentation often means invented later. But it also meant I had a window. I walked them out, no courtesy smile, just the iron of the gate sliding shut between us. Melanie lingered on the sidewalk like a storm that couldn't decide whether to hit. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," she said. "That line usually precedes a mistake," I replied. "Don't make it." She pivoted on a hard heel and strode off, phone already at her ear. If I had to guess, she was calling the one or two board members who still believed her bark had bite. She would speak quickly, fill the air with confident nonsense, and hang up before anyone asked for a PDF. Inside, my kitchen smelled faintly of last night's coffee and lemon oil. I stood at the fridge and stared at the arborist's report again just to steady myself. Quercus alba healthy, estimated age 102. Replacement value $42 700. I ran a hand over the stack of papers, title, and deed survey lines, fence permits, correspondence with the City Forestry Division. I didn't pick this fight, but if she wanted it official, it would be official. I dialed Thomas. If a voice could wear a tailored suit, my friends did. "Morning, Ethan. I saw your missed call. Everything all right? Define all right," I said, and told him everything from the first scream of the chainsaw to Melanie's fake scripture. He didn't interrupt, just took notes the way he always had, like a stenographer at an autopsy. "Send me the video," he said. And the arborist report. "You did the right thing by recording. 2 points. 1, trespass is trespass. 2, if she continues, we're no longer in HOA slap fight territory, we're in felony property damage. The valuation and the arborist certification are key. Keep your cool, document, and call the police if they set foot there again." "Already on it," I said. "I'll CC the board on everything." "Good. Add a line requesting confirmation of the bylaw. Make them put in writing what doesn't exist." I hung up and drafted the email. Subject line: unauthorized tree removal attempt. Immediate board attention required. I kept the tone civil but cold, bullets pointed, and numbered facts, timestamps, names the fabricated bylaw 47.8 cited verbatim. Attached the video, the report, and snapshots of the trunk, the clean bark, the high canopy, the swing I'd unhooked 10 minutes earlier with hands that were suddenly shaking. By the time I hit send, the neighborhood group text was already pinging with footage. Someone down the block had gotten Melanie's dramatic entrance in sparkling 1080p, her marching across my lawn like patent chainsaw concierge in tow. The comments were a parade of clucking emojis and the sort of neutered outrage people save for minor celebrity scandals. But buried in there were the messages that mattered. "We've had issues with her too. She tried to cite us for a bird feeder. Happy to testify if needed. Seeds planted." At the hardware store later that morning, I bought 4 more cameras and a roll of signage that read with refreshing bluntness, "No trespassing." The clerk, a retiree with forearms like old rope, glanced at my haul. "Problem raccoons?" he asked. "Two-legged," I said. "Ah," he nodded, the ancient village signal for say no more. I spent the afternoon on the ladder, tightening brackets, running cable, aiming lenses so that not even a vindictive squirrel could escape documentation. I angled one camera straight at the oak's trunk half to protect it half in case I ever needed to replay its quiet strength like a benediction. Around 5, the board's reply landed. James Holloway, chairperson, wrote with the weary clarity of a man who'd been copied into too many HOA wars. "There is no bylaw 47.8. The HOA has not authorized any removal or citation against your property. Any notices you receive to the contrary should be forwarded to the board immediately. We will address this." I printed it out because paper feels heavier than pixels. Then I taped it to the inside of my back door where I could read it every time I went outside. The oak backlit in the late sun threw a cathedral of shadows over the grass. It looked unbothered. I envied it. Evening settled. Somewhere a grill flared and somebody cheered at a game. I sat under the oak with a legal pad and made a list: dates, calls, next steps. Melanie believed urgency could be faked. I believed patience could be sharpened. She'd brought a chainsaw to a paper trail. I liked my odds. And still I could feel it, the promise of escalation hanging in the warm air like humidity. Bullies don't retreat, they regroup. She would come back louder, meaner, convinced that repetition turns lies into law. Good. I wanted her to. Cameras were ready. So was I. By the next morning, the oak looked the same, solid, unmoved, a sentinel in the yard, but I didn't. Sleep had been a suggestion, not an achievement. Every creak outside had felt like the return of Melanie Payne with her phantom bylaws and her chainsaw mercenaries. By sunrise, I had brewed enough coffee to fuel a small army and decided it was time to stop reacting and start fortifying. My first call was to the non-emergency line of the Brookstone Police. "I'd like to report an attempted property destruction and trespass," I said. The dispatcher's tone shifted from routine to alert when I mentioned a chainsaw. Within the hour, a patrol car pulled up, red and blue lights, politely quiet. Officer Rodriguez, a broad-shouldered man with a mustache so perfect it looked painted on, stepped out first. Officer Chen, younger, sharp-eyed, followed, notebook ready. They walked the perimeter with me, inspecting where Melanie's hired cutters had nicked into the oak's bark. It wasn't deep, more of a scar than a wound, but the insult was worse than the injury. "You've got her on video?" Rodriguez asked. "Multiple angles," I said, handing over a thumb drive. She even announced the fake bylaw for the camera. Subsection B, apparently of her imagination. Chen smirked, despite herself. "Creative." I explained how Melanie had invoked her self-manufactured authority, how she'd cited non-existent rules, and how she'd promised formal notices. "She's escalating," I added. "And I'm not waiting for her to take the trunk all the way through before something is done." Rodriguez leaned a hand on the oak. "This tree's older than any of us. Looks strong to me. You've got enough documentation here to press charges if she tries again. My advice, keep those cameras rolling. Call us the second you see her set foot past your fence. We'll have it on record." They left with a copy of the footage and promised a patrol swing-by during the week. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like the law wasn't just a phrase Melanie tossed around. It was something heavier, something that could land on her shoulders if she pushed further. "Next, call Thomas Green, my lawyer and longtime friend." When he answered, his voice carried the calm of a man whose weapon of choice was paperwork. "I've reviewed the board's email you forwarded. That alone dismantles her claim, but we need more." "What kind of more expert testimony?" "An arborist. Someone who can quantify what she almost destroyed. If this escalates to court, judges love numbers. Value age condition. And we'll need to establish that the oak is not a hazard, that her justification is baseless." "Already ahead of you," I said. "I've got a report on file. Certified arborist. Says the tree's healthy. Replacement value around 40 grand. Thomas whistled low. 40,000 Ethan. If she'd succeeded, that's felony territory. Criminal mischief, property destruction easily. With video evidence, she'd be boxed in like a raccoon in a dumpster." I pictured Melanie in a courtroom wagging her clipboard at a judge who couldn't care less about her bylaws. The thought warmed me more than the coffee. By midday, the arborist himself, Dr. Leonard Marks, came to re-inspect. He circled the oak with a reverence usually reserved for art. "Quercus alba," he murmured, tracing the grooves of the bark. "White oak. Healthy crown. Strong branching. Minimal pest presence. This tree could stand another century if cared for properly." He crouched, brushing away soil at the base. Some superficial scarring from her attempt, but nothing fatal. "If she'd gone deeper," he shook his head. "Well, you'd be mourning a part of your family history. Tell me about it," I said. "You can give me a statement." "Absolutely," he said, tucking a tape measure back into his kit. "I'll update your report, note the value, and add the risk analysis. If she tries again, there's no wiggle room." I signed his invoice with satisfaction. Every page was another nail in Melanie's coffin of credibility. Sure enough, by late afternoon, a notice appeared in my mailbox. Not from the city, not from the official HOA board, but from Melanie herself. Printed on HOA letterhead, she must have pirated from a template. The letter accused me of endangering community welfare by failing to remove the oak and threatened a daily fine of $250 until compliance. At the bottom, her signature, Melanie Payne, HOA president. I scanned it, laughed, and sent it straight to Thomas and the board. Within an hour, James Holloway, the real chairman, replied to all. "This is not an authorized communication. Please disregard any notices issued by Miss Payne outside official HOA channels." It was the legal equivalent of pulling the rug out from under her, and I almost wished I'd been there to see her face when she realized her little scheme had been exposed in writing. Still, I knew Melanie. She didn't back down, she doubled down. A woman like her believed repetition could make fiction into fact. She would claim, insist, demand until someone too tired to argue simply gave in. But I wasn't tired. I was caffeinated, camera ready, and braced for the next swing. That evening, as the oak stretched shadows across the yard, I sat beneath it with my laptop and drafted a personal log. Time-stamped entries, scanned letters, copied emails, screenshots of texts from neighbors who had filmed her trespass. I imagined one day laying it all out on a courtroom projector, the saga of a tree versus a tyrant. Halfway through typing, my phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. "Remember, Ethan, HOA power is not absolute. They can fine for paint colors and lawn length, not chainsaw diplomacy." She crossed the property line. That's where HOA ends, and the law begins. I leaned back, staring up through the lattice of branches, the leaves whispering like gossip overhead. Maybe Melanie thought she was running this neighborhood, but she'd just been handed a lesson. The law didn't wear a clipboard. It wore a badge, carried a gavel, and held receipts in neat manila folders. And I had plenty of those. If you've never received an HOA violation notice before, let me describe the sensation. It's like finding a parking ticket on your windshield when you know darn well you fed the meter. It's not fear so much as irritation, a paper mosquito bite that makes you itch in places you didn't know could itch. 2 days after the chainsaw incident, I opened my mailbox and found a neat little envelope with the HOA logo in the corner. Inside, a notice of violation addressed to me citing, you guessed it, Bylaw 47.8, unsafe vegetation hazard. According to the document, my oak tree represented an imminent threat to the safety of Brookstone Meadows. The letter demanded that I remove it within 7 days or incur a $250 daily fine until compliance was achieved. I laughed so hard the mailman probably thought I'd lost my mind. The oak was standing tall and my yard birds, fluttering in its branches, squirrels chasing each other in manic spirals, and here was Melanie Payne trying to convince the world it was a ticking time bomb. The kicker was the signature line. Melanie Payne, HOA president. She'd even stamped it with a knockoff seal. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought she raided the arts and crafts aisle at Office Depot. I marched back inside, scanned the document, and sent it to the HOA board with the subject line, Creative Writing Assignment Turned in Late. Within minutes, I got a reply from James Holloway, the real HOA chairman. Mr. Boyd, this is not an authorized communication. The board has not issued any such violation, and there is no bylaw 47.8. Please disregard Miss Payne's notice. Forward any further correspondence of this nature to us immediately. James Holloway, HOA chairman. That was polite HOA speak for Melanie is making stuff up again. Still, I wanted something more official, so I picked up the phone and called James directly. He answered with the exhausted tone of a man who's been dealing with Melanie for far too long. Ethan, I knew this was coming, he sighed. She's been overstepping for months. Tried to tell one neighbor their fence had to be painted approved beige. Demanded another remove a basketball hoop because it attracted delinquents. She's not president. She's not even on the executive board. She's chair of the landscaping committee. Her actual responsibilities are limited to seasonal flower suggestions. I let that sink in. So she's basically the volunteer in charge of picking tulips, and she thinks that makes her judge, jury, and chainsaw executioner. Exactly, James said. And frankly, the board's had enough. You sending us this evidence, this fake violation, helps us deal with her. We'll be calling a meeting. I could practically hear his pen scratching across paper. Melanie had just handed me Exhibit A in her downfall. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. Screenshots of my violation notice had spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. Neighbors chimed in. She fined us last month for leaving our trash bins out too long. She told my kids their sidewalk chalk violated HOA guidelines. She tried to stop us from planting roses, said only hydrangeas were permitted. The chorus was clear. Melanie had been running a one-woman crusade of nonsense for years, and people were tired of it. But here's the thing about power bullies. Don't surrender it willingly. The next day, 3 more envelopes appeared in my mailbox. Each one identical $250 fines stacking like Monopoly money. By her math, I now owed the HOA $750, even though the HOA itself had said the notices were fake. I took them inside, lined them up on the kitchen counter like trophies, and recorded a video. Day 3 of Melanie's fantasy HOA, I said, holding up the letters. She's now fined me $750 for the crime of owning a tree. Next week, maybe she'll fine me for breathing without a permit. The video wasn't for laughs, it was for evidence. Still, my niece later told me I should post it online because it was funny in a depressing adult way. Later that afternoon, I noticed Melanie patrolling the sidewalk outside my fence. Clipboard and hand phone pressed to her ear, pacing like a general surveying enemy territory. When she spotted my security camera pointed right at her, she gave a tight smile and a wave that said, "I know you're watching, but I don't care." I waved back all teeth. That evening, James called me again. We had an emergency board meeting. We're stripping Melanie of her landscaping committee role. She's not to send any further correspondence under HOA letterhead. And if she does, it'll be grounds for legal action. Good, I said. But do you really think she'll stop? James hesitated. Honestly, no. But now you've got it in writing from the board. If she pushes further, it's on her. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the oak silhouetted in the evening light. Strong, steady, unshaken. Meanwhile, Melanie was unraveling, trying to build a throne out of paperwork that didn't exist. The irony was delicious. The more fake fines she sent, the more she proved my case. The oak didn't need defending. Melanie was building the evidence against herself, one bogus notice at a time. What she didn't know, and what made me smile into my coffee, was that the police, my lawyer, and the real HOA board were all now in the loop. Every envelope she dropped in my mailbox was just another brick in the wall closing in around her. But I also knew something else. People like Melanie don't slow down when they hit a wall. They try to climb it, claw through it, or set it on fire. And sure enough, the storm that was brewing wouldn't come from the sky alone. Because Melanie Payne was about to escalate, and this time karma would be holding the chainsaw. The police didn't waste time. 2 days after the fake fines appeared in my mailbox, I heard a knock on my door that carried authority. When I opened it, Officers Rodriguez and Chen stood there again, hats tipped back, expressions somewhere between weary and stern. Behind them was a marked cruiser, lights-off presence unmistakable. "Morning, mister," Boyd Rodriguez said. "We're here on follow-up. We've spoken with the board and reviewed your evidence. Just so you know, miss, Payne's actions are under official warning status now. If she sets foot on your property again without your permission, we will arrest her for trespassing. No gray area left." Chen added, flipping open her notebook. "We also want you to understand those notices she sent you completely invalid," the board confirmed. "Keep every copy, though. Paper trail like this is gold if it goes to court." I invited them into the yard. The oak stood proudly in the middle, dappled light streaming through its branches. I watched both officers glance up at it as if they too felt its weight and worth. "She's fixated on this tree," I said. "Why? Because it blocks her view? Because she doesn't like squirrels? Because she wants to prove she's more powerful than the deed to my property?" Rodriguez shrugged. "Control. Some people don't feel alive unless they're running somebody else's life. But she's been warned. Next time it's cuffs." I nodded, thankful, though deep down I knew Melanie wouldn't take the hint. If bullies could read caution signs, they wouldn't be bullies. After they left, I headed to the hardware store again. This time, I wasn't just thinking cameras, I was thinking perimeter. Motion lights, reinforced locks, the kind of signage that makes even delivery drivers think twice about stepping off the walkway. I bought enough no trespassing and 24-hour surveillance signs to decorate my yard like a crime drama set. Back home, I set up the new system. Each camera connected to cloud storage, each motion light rigged to blaze at the slightest raccoon shuffle. My phone pinged with alerts every time a leaf fluttered, which was annoying but satisfying. At least I knew the oak wasn't alone anymore. It had digital guardians. The first night the system was live, I sat on the porch with a cold beer watching the cameras cycle on my tablet. The oak loomed in the center frame, proud as ever, with its branches whispering in the dusk breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt prepared. If Melanie came sneaking again, I'd have it in living color angles sharp enough to make a courtroom jury lean forward in disbelief. But preparation doesn't mean relaxation. Every rustle in the bushes, every car door slamming down the block set my nerves buzzing. I imagined her silhouette at the fence line, clipboard clutched like a dagger, muttering her fake bylaws under her breath. And sure enough, the very next morning my system paid off. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I checked the feed, and there she was. Melanie Payne, strutting down the sidewalk in her usual pressed slacks and pastel blouse, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't step onto my property this time, but she paced back and forth outside the fence, craning her neck to glare at the oak as though she could chop it down with her stare. She spotted the camera lens pointed squarely at her and smiled, a thin plastic curve of lips that screamed defiance. Then she lifted her phone, snapped a picture of my yard, and scribbled something furiously on her clipboard. After a few minutes of theatrical note-taking, she strutted off heels, clicking like punctuation marks. I replayed the footage 3 times, shaking my head. It was almost comical. Almost. Except comedy doesn't usually come with the threat of chainsaws and lawsuits. Later that day, an email arrived from the HOA board. "Mr. Boyd," it read, "please be aware that Miss Payne has been formally stripped of all committee responsibilities. Any correspondence you receive from her claiming HOA authority is fraudulent. Should she attempt to fine, cite, or penalize you again, please forward it directly to the board." The message ended with a final line that made me smile. "We regret her behavior has caused disruption. Steps are being taken to prevent recurrence." Translation: Melanie Payne had just been publicly declawed. But in my gut, I knew better. She wasn't going to lick her wounds quietly. No, she'd be back louder, meaner, and dumber, because that's how people like her operate. That evening, I sat beneath the oak again. The branches swayed the air, smelled of earth and history, and I thought about how this tree had stood through a century of storms, wars, and winters. If Melanie thought she could intimidate it or me, she was out of her depth. Still, as twilight settled and the neighborhood lights blinked on one by one, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm hadn't hit yet. The cameras, the warnings, the emails, they were just sandbags stacked against a rising tide. And if history had taught me anything, it was that Melanie Payne didn't back down. She regrouped. She schemed. She came back swinging. And as I sipped the last of my beer staring up into the Oaks Cathedral canopy, I made a quiet vow when she did I'd be ready. It happened 3 nights later, the kind of night where the sky seems determined to shake loose every secret it's been holding. By sundown, the wind had already picked up, making the oak's branches sway like old dancers keeping rhythm with the storm. I sat inside with the cameras open on my tablet Rain, battering the windows, thunder rolling so deep it rattled the glasses in the cupboard. The oak, my oak, stood tall and steady. It had weathered storms for a century. This one would just be another entry in its long history. But across the street, Melanie Payne's yard told a different story. Her pine tree, tall but brittle, starved of care for at least 2 years, leaned ominously as the gusts tore at its limbs. I'd noticed before how the needles had browned, how bark peeled off like paper strips. Neglected, ignored. A storm like this was going to test it, and I already knew how that test would end. Around 10 p.m., it happened. A crack so loud it cut through the roar of thunder, a splintering shriek of wood giving way. I rushed to the window, and there it was, the pine collapsing in slow, terrible grace like a felled giant. It landed square on Melanie's roof, smashing shingles, splitting beams, collapsing part of her second story. The cameras caught the moment in sharp definition, raindrops glinting like sparks, as the tree punched a jagged wound straight through her pristine white siding. The neighborhood woke. Lights flipped on doors, open voices rose in disbelief. And in the middle of it all, Melanie herself came tearing into the street, drenched hair plastered across her face, pointing straight at my house. "You did this!" she screamed. Her voice cut through the storm, almost as sharp as the lightning. "You sabotaged my tree, you poisoned it, you made this happen." I stepped out onto my porch, rain stinging my skin, and stared back at her. "Melanie, you've lost it. That pine's been dead for years. Everyone could see it coming." She advanced halfway across the street, finger jabbing like a weapon. "You wanted revenge. You made my tree fall." By then, the officers had arrived. Rodriguez and Chen again pulling up with wipers, slapping furiously headlights, cutting the sheets of rain. They jumped out, hurried over, and immediately tried to calm Melanie down. "Ma'am, back away," Rodriguez ordered, holding a hand up. "This is an accident caused by the storm. Nothing criminal here." But she wasn't listening. She jabbed her finger toward me again. "Arrest him. He's been plotting against me. You saw the emails, you know he wants to destroy me." Chen shook her head, firm but calm. "Miss Payne, we have documentation on your pine tree. Multiple neighbors have reported its poor condition for over 2 years. This is weather damage, nothing more." Neighbors had gathered now, raincoats thrown over pajamas, umbrellas, bending under the wind. And one by one, they started speaking up. "She never trimmed that tree. It's been dead since last spring. I told her to call an arborist last year." Their voices cut through Melanie's accusations, a chorus of reality against her delusion, and she hated it. I could see it in her eyes, the fury of someone who thrives on control, realizing the crowd no longer believes her. Finally, Rodriguez stepped in. "Miss Payne, this is not the Boyd's responsibility. You'll need to contact your insurance and the city inspector tomorrow morning. End of discussion." Melanie turned, rain streaming down her face, and for a second I thought she might lunge at me. But then she did something worse. She smiled. A slow, eerie smile that promised she wasn't finished. She stormed back into her house, slammed the door behind her, and the storm carried on. I stood there on the porch, soaked through heart hammering, and let out a bitter laugh. "The universe doesn't need my help to punish you," I muttered. The next morning, daylight revealed the damage in merciless clarity. Half of Melanie's roof was caved in. Broken glass glittered across her driveway. Blue tarps flapped where emergency crews had tried to stabilize the mess. Neighbors walked past, shaking their heads, whispering. And of course, right on cue, another envelope showed up in my mailbox. This one was a handwritten incident report accusing me of malicious negligence leading to property damage. She'd even underlined it 3 times as if that gave it weight. I didn't even bother opening the whole thing. I took a photo, sent it to James Holloway and the board, and attached it to my growing file. Then I sent a copy to Thomas, my lawyer, who replied almost instantly. "She just gave us Exhibit B. Keep it safe." By lunchtime, the police had returned not to question me, but to check on Melanie, who neighbors said was wandering the street, muttering about conspiracies and vendettas. She refused help, refused to talk, and slammed her door again. The oak stood in my yard, calm and eternal, casting shade, as if none of it mattered. And maybe to the oak it didn't, but to me it was clear the storm hadn't just brought down a tree. It had brought Melanie closer to collapse, too. Her pine had fallen, her roof was broken, her lies were unraveling. Yet deep down, I knew she'd twist even this disaster into another excuse to attack. Because Melanie Payne wasn't just unlucky, she was relentless. And the storm that had toppled her tree had only set the stage for something bigger, darker, and more dangerous. The storm passed, but the fallout didn't. By the time the tarps on Melanie Payne's roof stopped flapping, the city inspectors had already scheduled a visit. Funny thing about emergency damage, it tends to invite a closer look. And when the inspectors showed up in their reflective vests and clipboards, they didn't just see a fallen pine tree. They saw the whole rotten picture. Peeling paint, cracked siding, gutters clogged so thick with pine needles they sprouted moss. And that was just the exterior. From the sidewalk I watched them frown, shake their heads, scribble notes. Melanie trailed behind them like a furious shadow, trying to narrate away each violation. That's temporary. I've already scheduled repairs. Those cracks aren't structural. That moss is ornamental. The inspectors didn't buy a word. One of them snapped photos, another measured the sag in her porch. When they were done, they left her with a bright orange notice taped to her door. Failure to maintain property. Multiple code violations. Mandatory compliance within 60 days or face fines. It was deliciously ironic. Months earlier, Melanie had filed petitions with the city to tighten neighborhood standards, hoping to weaponize stricter codes against everyone else. She'd bragged about it at HOA meetings, waving paperwork like a battle flag, and now those very standards had circled back like a boomerang with her name etched on it. That evening, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. Screenshots of her violation notice circulated like wildfire. One neighbor quipped, "Guess she should have fined herself first." Another added, "Maybe she'll cite herself for unsafe vegetation hazard too." I stayed quiet, but inside I was grinning. The next day, Melanie doubled down. She called an emergency HOA inspection and delivered notices to half the block. People found slips in their mailboxes, claiming everything from unauthorized lawn ornaments to non-compliant mailbox paint. She even dinged the Millers for having an unapproved trampoline, though it had been there since before she moved in. But here's where she miscalculated. She filed the same notice against her own property. Apparently she thought blanketing the entire neighborhood would make it look like she was fair and balanced. The problem, her own house, really was out of compliance. And when city officials reviewed the paperwork, they realized she'd essentially confessed to her own violations in writing. It was self-sabotage at its finest, like reporting your neighbor for speeding while handing the cop your own unpaid tickets. Word spread fast. By evening, neighbors weren't just annoyed, they were laughing. "She fined herself," someone posted. "That's commitment." Another neighbor wrote, "Does that mean she owes herself $250 a day, hope she pays on time?" Still, the humor didn't erase the tension. Melanie's behavior was unraveling, and everyone could feel it. She stalked the sidewalks with her clipboard, jotting down phantom offenses, glaring at kids' bikes left on driveways, snapping photos of flower beds. It was like watching a dictator cling to power after the throne's already been carried off. I kept my cameras rolling, my files growing thicker. Each notice she slipped into a mailbox. Each photo she snapped of my oak became another brick in the wall, closing in on her. Then came the board meeting. James Holloway had called it after receiving dozens of complaints. Neighbors packed into the community center, folding chairs, squeaking murmurs, buzzing. Melanie arrived late, striding in as if the room owed her silence. She wore her usual pastel blouse and pearls, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the storm inside. When James opened the floor, the floodgates burst. One by one, neighbors recounted her harassment. The fake fines, the threats, the clipboard crusades. Even mild-mannered retirees who never raised their voices were shaking with indignation. Finally, James held up a copy of her latest stunt, the emergency inspection notices, including the one she'd filed against herself. "Miss Payne," he said, voice flat, "can you explain why you submitted fabricated citations under HOA authority when the board never approved them?" Melanie straightened chin high. "Because this community is falling apart. Because no one else is willing to enforce standards. I am the only one willing to keep Brookstone Meadows respectable." Her voice rose, with each word echoing off the low ceiling. But the room didn't respond with applause. Only silence. And silence is deadly when you expect cheers. James cleared his throat. "Let me be clear. You are not president. You were never president. You were chair of the landscaping committee. That role has been revoked. You have no authority to issue fines, notices, or citations of any kind. Do you understand?" The silence stretched. Melanie's face flushed crimson. Then, with a sharp huff, she stormed out, clipboard clutched like a life raft. The room exhaled. Neighbors traded glances, relief tempered with unease. We all knew what that meant. She wasn't finished. Melanie Payne wasn't the type to fold her tent and vanish. No, she'd come back, harder. When I got home that night, I sat beneath the oak with my tablet scrolling through the footage of her pacing the sidewalks, scribbling on her clipboard. The tree swayed gently overhead, leaves whispering like conspirators. I thought about how storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they creep back at midnight carrying chainsaws. And sure enough, in the pit of my stomach, I knew the truth. Melanie was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. I should have known it wouldn't end with a board meeting. People like Melanie Payne don't take humiliation as a lesson, they take it as gasoline. By the time the next week rolled around, my gut was already warning me something was coming. The oak had stood for over a century, but Melanie had made it her personal vendetta. It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I was half asleep on the couch, still in yesterday's flannel shirt when I tapped the screen. The camera feed flickered into view, and there she was. Melanie Payne, dressed in dark sweatpants and a rain jacket, her hair tied back in a messy bun, sneaking across my lawn like a burglar in a community theater play. And in her hands, a gas-powered chainsaw. I sat bolt upright, adrenaline turning my veins into live wires. She yanked the starter cord, and the chainsaw snarled to life loud enough to wake the whole block. The oak shuddered as she pressed the blade into its trunk. Sawdust sprayed like sparks floating in the camera's infrared glow. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911 with one hand and slipped on my boots with the other. "This is Ethan Boyd at 214 Brookstone," I said, voice clipped, urgent. "She's back. She's on my property right now with a chainsaw. Send units immediately." Dispatch assured me officers were on their way. Meanwhile, I stepped out onto the porch, phone in hand, camera light flashing. "Melanie, drop it," I shouted over the roar. "You're on camera. The cops are coming." She didn't even flinch. Her eyes glowed wild in the lamplight as she leaned harder into the cut-teeth bared chainsaw whining against the oak's thick trunk. "This tree is a menace," she screamed. "I'm saving the neighborhood." By then, neighbors were pouring out of their homes, drawn by the racket. Robes, flapping slippers, squelching on wet grass, they stood on the sidewalks in shock. A few raised their phones, recording. One kid shouted, "She's nuts," and his mother yanked him back. I kept my distance. No way was I tangling with a spinning blade wielded by a woman unhinged. But I didn't need to. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until red and blue lights bounced across the street. Two cruisers screeched to a stop, and out came Rodriguez and Chen, weapons holstered but hands firm on their belts. "Drop the saw, Miss Payne," Rodriguez bellowed. She turned, eyes wide, face streaked with sweat, and shouted back, "You don't understand. I'm the president. I have the authority." Chen stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. "You are trespassing. You are committing felony property damage. Drop it now, or we will take you down." For a moment, I thought she'd keep going. She was that far gone. But finally, with a frustrated wail, she let the saw clatter to the ground. Sparks hissed as the chain spun to a stop. Officers moved in, cuffing her as she kicked and cursed. The oak bore the wound. A deep, ugly gash cut halfway through its trunk, raw wood, exposed sap bleeding like amber tears. My heart sank as I realized what that meant. Sure enough, the next morning, the city arborist arrived to inspect. Dr. Marks, the same man who'd praised the oak's health weeks earlier, walked slowly around it, measuring, probing. His face was grave. "Ethan," he said finally, "I hate to tell you this. The structural integrity is compromised. With a cut this deep, the tree is unstable. It could collapse in a storm, or even under its own weight. For safety reasons, the city will have to order its removal." It felt like a funeral notice. That tree had survived a century of storms, but it couldn't survive Melanie Payne's madness. When the crew came to take it down, half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Some stood silent, hands in pockets, heads bowed. Others muttered angry words about Melanie. I filmed the whole thing, not out of voyeurism, but out of duty. Evidence, closure. Later, Thomas, my lawyer, called with news. "She's in deep this time. Trespass, criminal mischief, felony, vandalism, reckless endangerment. And with your footage, the neighbors' videos, the officer's testimony, there's no wiggle room." I sat on my porch watching the crew grind the oak into logs and felt the irony sting. "So she got what she wanted," I said bitterly. "The tree's gone." "Not exactly," Thomas said. "She didn't get it removed. She got it destroyed. There's a difference. And the law knows the difference. She'll pay, Ethan. One way or another, she'll pay." When night fell again, my yard looked naked without the oak. Just an empty patch of churned earth where roots once clung deep. But I wasn't alone. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, beers, and kind words. "Mrs. Miller from next door put a hand on my shoulder and said, "She thought she could take something from you, but all she did was take from herself." And she was right. Melanie Payne had crossed a line she could never uncross. The oak may have fallen, but her downfall was only just beginning. When the last branch of the oak was carted away, the silence in my yard felt wrong, like a missing tooth you can't stop tonguing. The ground was scarred, raw dirt and splinters where shade and history used to be. But the emptiness didn't last long because the legal storm was only beginning, and this time it wasn't me in the hot seat. It was Melanie Payne. Her arrest had already made the local news. A photo of her being led away in handcuffs, hair, wild face, twisted in fury, ran under the headline HOA president arrested in midnight chainsaw rampage. Never mind that she wasn't even president, the press loved the title. The irony was delicious, and for once the public was on my side. Comments online skewered her Karen energy level 100. Imagine losing your mind over a tree. Meanwhile, Thomas, my lawyer, kept me updated. The DA is treating this as a felony, he said, his voice calm but edged with satisfaction. Multiple counts: criminal trespass, felony property damage, reckless endangerment. And given her history with those fake notices, we've got a pattern of harassment that strengthens the case. I asked the question that gnawed at me, but what if she tries to spin it, claim she was protecting the community or that she had authority? Thomas chuckled. Ethan, you've got her on camera inventing bylaws. You've got the board's official statements, the arborist reports, the police warnings. Her defense is a house of cards in a hurricane. This isn't going away for her. Sure enough, the HOA board met again, this time without Melanie. The community center was packed. James Holloway stood at the front solemn and read a prepared statement. Effective immediately, Melanie Payne is barred from holding any HOA committee or leadership role. She is further prohibited from issuing communications on behalf of Brookstone Meadows. The board will cooperate fully with law enforcement in her prosecution. The room erupted not in chaos but in applause. Neighbors clapped, some cheered, others just sighed in relief. For years, Melanie had been the self-appointed dictator of hydrangeas and hedge heights. Now she was dethroned, humiliated, and facing real consequences. But the victory wasn't mine alone. Something shifted in the neighborhood. People who used to keep their heads down started speaking up. The Millers offered to help me with replanting. The Johnsons organized a neighborhood watch group. Even old Mr. Carter, who rarely left his porch swing, came over with a thermos of coffee and said, "Guess we all needed a reminder that tyrants only rule if we let 'em." It felt good. Strange, but good. For the first time in years, Brookstone Meadows felt less like a prison of rules and more like a community. Insurance came through, too. They covered the cost of removing the oak, reimbursed me for its appraised value, and even approved funds for replanting. It didn't bring back the century-old tree, but it softened the blow. As for Melanie, her downfall deepened. Court dates were set. Reporters staked out her driveway, snapping photos of her scowling under a hoodie as she fetched her mail. One article detailed how the city had fined her property for multiple code violations, ironically, the very standards she had lobbied for. I won't pretend I didn't savor the irony. She had tried to bury me in paperwork and fines only to dig her own grave. But justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about closure. And the day Melanie stood in front of a judge trembling in her pastel blazer was the day closure finally came. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching as the DA laid out the evidence. The videos, the notices, the arborist's report. Officer Rodriguez testified about the warnings she'd ignored. Chen described the arrest, the midnight chainsaw still humming when they arrived. The judge listened, lips pressed tight, expression unimpressed. Melanie tried to defend herself, of course. "I was protecting the community," she said, voice cracking. "That tree was dangerous. The HOA bylaws." The judge cut her off. "Miss Payne, those bylaws do not exist. Your actions were unauthorized, unlawful, and reckless. You endangered yourself, your neighbors, and destroyed property of significant historical and monetary value. This court is not in the business of indulging fantasies of authority." Hearing that, seeing Melanie's face collapse under the weight of truth was more satisfying than I expected. Not because I wanted her ruined, but because I wanted the madness to end. The sentence came down: restitution for damages, mandatory community service, mental health counseling, probation. And most striking, she was barred from holding any position of authority in the neighborhood ever again. Later, Thomas leaned over to me in the hallway. "She'll also have to sell. Too much debt now, too many fines. She won't stay here much longer." I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd felt in months. The oak was gone, but so was her shadow. That evening, the neighborhood gathered in my yard. We grilled burgers, kids played tag where the tree once stood, and for the first time in a long while, people laughed without glancing nervously at the sidewalk. Someone raised a toast to Ethan for standing up, but I corrected them. To the oak, I said, because if it weren't for that tree, we might never have stood together. Glasses clinked, laughter rang, and in that moment the hole in my yard felt less like a loss and more like a beginning. Melanie Payne thought she'd destroy me by cutting down my oak. Instead, she destroyed herself. And in her absence, something stronger began to take root not just in my yard but in the whole community. The morning after the courthouse verdict, I stepped into my backyard and felt a strange kind of quiet. For the first time in months, there was no dread humming in my chest, no fear of finding Melanie Payne lurking with her clipboard or a chainsaw. The oak was gone, yes, but the emptiness no longer felt like defeat. It felt like a foundation. That week, my neighbors rallied. The Johnson kids painted a sign that read, "This yard is ours too," in bright crayon colors. The Millers showed up with gardening gloves and bags of soil. Even Mr. Carter, who hadn't lifted a tool since the Reagan administration, brought his old shovel. Together, we planted a new sapling, a young oak, about 15 years old, donated by a historical tree foundation. When the roots settled into the earth, someone suggested we add a plaque. So we did, a small bronze plate set in stone right by the trunk. It read, "The Boyd Oak, a symbol of community strength, destroyed by one, replaced by many." That dedication day felt like a festival. Neighbors brought casseroles, grills, smoked, kids ran circles around the new tree. Someone joked it was a tree-warming party, and the name stuck. For once, laughter rang louder than gossip in Brookstone Meadows. I stood off to the side watching it all unfold. People who used to avoid each other now swapped recipes and stories. Folks who once whispered about HOA politics now laughed openly about Melanie's fake bylaws. My yard, once the battleground, had become the gathering place. Of course, not everyone was in a party mood. Across the street, Melanie's house sat dark and silent. For sale sign crooked in the lawn. She was gone, forced out by debt fines and humiliation. The storm had claimed her throne, and now she was just a bitter memory. Still, her shadow lingered. A few neighbors confessed they feared another Melanie might rise one day, a new tyrant, with a clipboard and a taste for control. I smiled and pointed to the oak sapling. That's why we planted this. It's not just a tree, it's a reminder. One person tried to tear us down, but together we grew back stronger. As weeks passed, the neighborhood settled into a rhythm it hadn't known in years. Kids played basketball without violation notices taped to their hoop. Gardeners planted whatever flowers they pleased. The HOA, under James Holloway's steady leadership, returned to what it was supposed to be, a board that maintained the pool schedule and organized summer barbecues, not a weapon for personal vendettas. Insurance checks arrived, covering part of the replanting and even paying for new landscaping around the sapling. With the extra funds, we added benches beneath the young oak, turning the spot into a little parklet. People came to sit to talk, to share coffee in the mornings. The oak wasn't fully grown yet, but already it was bringing us together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sapling in gold, Mrs. Miller asked me if I regretted any of it. The fights, the stress, the endless nights of paperwork. I thought about it. About the sleepless nights, the fear of hearing that chainsaw roar again, the heartbreak of watching my century-old oak fall. Regret, I said, shaking my head. No. Melanie thought she destroyed me, but all she did was prove how much we needed each other. This community was asleep. That tree woke us up. The lesson was simple, but sharp tyrants only win when people stay quiet. And sometimes it takes a storm or a chainsaw to remind everyone where the real power lies. I ended the evening under the new oak beer and hand neighbors chatting around me. The sapling swayed in the breeze, small but determined. Its roots were finding the soil, gripping deeper each day. And I realized something. Melanie Payne had destroyed a tree, but she had planted something she never intended, a community that wouldn't be bullied again. The oak would grow. We would grow with it. And the next time anyone tried to swing a chainsaw through our peace, they wouldn't just face me, they'd face all of us. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that strength doesn't come from standing alone. For months I thought it was me against Melanie Payne, one homeowner versus the iron fist of a clipboard tyrant. But I was wrong. The real turning point wasn't when I called the police, or when the board stripped her of her title, or even when the judge handed down her sentence. It was when my neighbors finally said, "Enough." Community isn't built in meetings or bylaws. It's built in moments when one person speaks up and another nods in agreement, and suddenly the silence breaks. The oak tree was just a tree, yes, but it became a symbol of what happens when people refuse to bow down. Even after it was cut, its roots gave us something to rally around. Life will always bring us people like Melanie, loud, arrogant, convinced their power is bigger than an island. But life will also bring us oaks, symbols of patience, strength, and resilience. When the oaks fall, it's our job to plant new ones, stronger ones, together. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't let bullies define your community. Stand tall, grow roots. And remember, no chainsaw can cut down what we build together. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a Melanie Payne in your life, someone who tried to control or intimidate you? Drop